You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. This September will be the 65th anniversary of an event that has resonated throughout ufology ever since. What happened on that night to Betty and Barney Hill is still as mystifying today as it was back then. With a new film based on the events currently being filmed, featuring Demi Moore and Coleman Domingo, the Hills' niece Kathleen Marden joins me to cover the case and her work to protect her aunt and uncle's legacy. But before we join Kathleen, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and much more. Thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube, and you can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for episodes and news. Our exclusive merchandise site is available via TeePublic, and you'll find the link for that in the show notes too, and our incredible intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful art, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Now, Kathleen Marden talks to us about that infamous interrupted journey home. My guest today is one of the most respected voices in the field of ufology, with a lifetime of work, with an unbreakable connection to one of the most confounding cases in the pantheon of the unexplained. Kathleen Marden has held the estate of Betty and Barney Hill since her aunt passed away back at the beginning of the 21st century. Throughout this period, Kathleen has used countless tests and scientific advancements to solidify the evidence of what happened to Betty and Barney that September night back in 1961. Kathleen, I am delighted and humbled to finally invite you to Mysteries and Monsters. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Are you still surprised? Here we are. They're going to be the 65th anniversary at the end of this year, which is quite remarkable. I think even for people like myself who aren't as directly connected to this case, it's amazing. It doesn't seem to lose its thrall over people, regardless of what people may or may not believe occurred that evening, as I say, back in September, to your aunt and uncle. People still keep coming back to this case.
They do. They absolutely do. It's the first scientifically investigated case of alien abduction. It began with a close encounter with a UFO in New Hampshire's White Mountains at about midnight. And my uncle saw and had conscious recall for observing entities, figures dressed in shiny black uniforms through his binoculars as the craft was hovering only 100 feet above him. So that is documented in the archival records. That is what my uncle saw. And he became very, very frightened by their movement, by the idea that they wanted to capture him. And he went screaming back to the car that was parked in the middle of the road, past a driver's side door open, so the interior light was on. Betty couldn't see what was happening outside. And Barney went racing, screaming to the car, to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. When he entered the car, he looked back and noticed that the craft was now moving in his direction. In a moment, as he was racing down the highway, it was over the top of the car, apparently, because they heard code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of their vehicle. Their car vibrated. It was a 1957 Chevy Bel Air, royal blue and white. So that buzzing tone caused tingling sensations. They could feel that buzzing in the car. And the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway. on a new stretch of road with no memory how they had gotten there. But they did have memories of somehow finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around, of some kind of a roadblock, of a fiery orb that seemed to be sitting on the ground. They didn't know where or when it occurred, but there was this piece of time that they simply had almost no memory for, just vague memories for. Very perplexing. They're now back on the interstate highway off U.S. Highway 3 that they had been traveling on. And they drive on home. When they arrive home, it is much later than they thought they would arrive home. And things are not right. Barney goes into the house first. He feels unclean, like he's been touched. He's achy. He goes to remove his best dress shoes. He was wearing a brown suit and brown dress shoes. And he noticed that his shiny, polished dress shoes now have deep scrapes on the toes. Betty goes in. She goes to remove her dress, and she discovers that the zipper is now broken. It's her favorite blue dress. The lining is torn on one side. The hem is torn down. All kinds of problems. She places the dress in her closet. The binocular strap is broken. They sit down and they draw sketches of what they remembered. And those sketches are part of the archival record. So we see the sketch of Barney, that Barney drew, not of Barney, but of the craft that he drew. There are two sketches. One of them shows the craft when it is 100 feet overhead. The other one when it's 200 feet overhead. The one that is 100 feet overhead, after it had moved across the highway and over a field, shows these figures in the window. So there's no doubt about what he saw. This was not brought forth for the first time through hypnosis. He had conscious recall for these figures, dressed in black, shiny uniforms. Betty wrote in a letter that I have, she wrote it only 6 days after they returned home. So it's all part of the archival record. They called Pease Air Force Base the following day because a friend of ours had asked our neighbor, we asked a neighbor, a physicist, what Betty should do. He told her to go to the car. She found spots on the trunk of the car that hadn't been there the day before. They were shiny, and there were 12 to 18 spots, all about the size of a U.S. $50 or a quarter, something like that. And she placed the compass, as the physicist told her to, over the tops of these spots. And the needle spun and spun, indicating there was a magnetic field around that. Barney saw it. He held the compass too. It did that to him too. She had finally had a NICAP reporter, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, an investigator, come out to their house. He came out in October, just less than a month later. He interviewed both of them together and separately. His report, which is a confidential report, is part of the archival record. It indicates everything that I've said and more, much, much more. And that the figures on the craft, Barney stated, reminded him of military officers in the way they moved, not in the way they looked, but in the way they moved. They moved with military precision. One stood at the window while the others turned in unison and went to what appeared to be a wall. And their arms went up, and he could now see them from the tops of their arms down to their knees. When their arms went up, little fin-like structures started to slide out of this silent, hovering, disc-shaped craft. The light behind those figures had the luminescence of a mercury vapor lamp, very bright lights, blue-white. When they're on those little fin-like structures that slid out, there were these like red balls of light, like little balls of light. So that's in the report. And he said that these figures that he was observing were somehow not human. They frightened him greatly, obviously. That's in the report as well.
Yes.
And he ran back to the car. And, this bothered Barney so terribly that he ended up with bleeding ulcers a couple of years later, a little less than 2 years later. He was hospitalized because of these bleeding ulcers that would not recede with traditional medical treatment. He also had high blood pressure. He wasn't sleeping well. This was really, really bothering him terribly. So he was referred to a psychiatrist. And that psychiatrist, after seeing him for a while, listened as Barney told him about how he and Betty had driven up to the White Mountains to look for that road, that dirt road lined with tall trees, where they saw the roadblock and the fiery orb. And Betty had been doing that for a while, since shortly after their UFO encounter in 1961. And the psychiatrist could see that this bothered Barney so badly that he referred him to Dr. Benjamin Simon. And Dr. Simon was a renowned psychiatrist who had worked with military veterans returning from World War II. He was a colonel in the military, and he had developed his own methodology, a special technique he used with deep trance hypnosis, where he got to the crux of the matter of what was bothering veterans who had shell shock, who had conversion hysteria, where, say, they could not walk even though there was no biological reason for them not to be able to walk.
Yep.
And Dr. Simon was highly successful in returning those men back home to their families and to their jobs. So he was the best person for Barney to see. He did not believe that UFOs were real and were abducting people off the road. So he had his own bias.
Yep.
But he hypnotized Betty and Barney separately for a period of 6 months. It was 4 months of hypnosis and a couple of months of psychotherapy, where they were together with Dr. Simon listening to the hypnosis recordings and just trying to integrate all of this information into their minds without being totally freaked out by it. So
I can only imagine. I mean, it's remarkable, really, because I think when people try and dismantle the incident, Kathleen, what I've noticed is they seem to completely ignore this starting point of the sketches and the writing of the notes, your aunt's dreams and the journal she'd started to keep, the things that they'd found on the car, on the dress. Because obviously this was all done prior to these sessions with Dr. Simons.
Absolutely, 2 years before.
But often people will try and puncture this case by saying that the regression simply pulls from recent episodes of Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, any science fiction. One of the things I've noticed about a lot of sceptical arguments in regards to UFO encounters, especially in the 50s and early 60s, is that people seem to presume that everybody in North America was into watching UFO films or UFO TV series. And I've often said, well, if you look at the box office, that's clearly not the case, because there was a lot of bad UFO films made in the 1950s, and I don't think that your aunt and uncle had much spare time to indulge in bad B movies, because they had so much going on outside of this. They were integral in the civil rights movement. They were really pushing the local changes that were coming. They were a mixed race couple, which is often overlooked, that people don't understand that in 1961 was a real outlier. It wasn't anywhere near as common as it is in this day and age, regardless of the fact of where they lived. It was still, you had to be careful where you had to watch yourself. And it's this kind of argument that gets put forward that suggests that they're attention seeking, or they didn't have anything to do with their life. And yet when you look at what your aunt and uncle were actually doing at that time, it would have been madness for people of that sort of standing in the community and what they were involved in, both professionally and personally, to come out with a story like this. It would completely discredit them, would it not?
Yes, you are 100% correct in your statements. And Betty and Barney were not science fiction fans. They did not watch science fiction. There is so much baloney around this case. It's just simply incredible. And these skeptics want to focus on hypnosis because the hypnosis is the weakest part. Because we know that under hypnosis, you say what you think, what you believe happened, but it may or may not be consistent with the actual biological truth. You think that it is, but it might not be, and there's no way to prove that it's real. So they can grab on this weakest part, which is the most sensational part, and ignore all of the evidence and all of the archival records, the conscious recall, everything, and just grasp on to these little pieces of information and details to try to destroy this case. Barney was working nights in that time frame, so he wasn't even watching television at night. He was on his way to work. And, so it was, the whole idea is ridiculous. But there are people who, for one reason or another, are unable to accept that this could even be real. And they just have a field day. They're highly imaginative. They talk about people being fantasy prone. Boy, do they have great memories full of fantasy about alternative explanations.
What was it like for yourself and your mum? Because I think, was it a couple of days after the event, obviously Betty had spoken with your mum and you'd gone round to speak to them. I would imagine, I mean, I grew up in a strange family, Kathleen, with haunted houses and all kinds of things. So it's a very similar kind of adjacent, strange conversation to be having. What was your initial feeling, regardless of how close you were to your aunt and uncle? How did you guys feel? What did you think about the ramifications? Was it that kind of thing that, has this really happened? Has they gone through something else traumatic? And it's because we know the mind can sometimes create screen memories to protect us in certain situations when we've had trauma, though certainly not to this extent, I would suggest, under any circumstances. Regardless of you being so close to them, what did you think that first time you heard the conversations about what had gone on with them?
Betty called my mother on the afternoon when they arrived home from having had that abduction. So it was actually the same day. But the abduction was in the middle of the night, early morning hours, and in that afternoon, after they'd slept, she called my mother. And I was home from school, listening into the conversation, and I was really, very confused when my mother would hang up the phone to do something and then call Betty back. In that period, in the interim, my mother would tell me what Betty had told her. And so I was sort of in denial, saying, but that's impossible. I learned in school that, we have these planets in our solar system, but that none of them appear to be inhabited. How could this be? I wasn't even thinking about outside our solar system into the galaxy, but that was my first reaction. And I was a huge Nancy Drew girl detective fan. And I really wanted to get down to Betty's and Barney's house right away so I could see that evidence that Betty was telling my mother about. And so I talked my father into driving us down a couple of days later, taking time off from work and getting us down there so that we could see this evidence and hear Betty's story myself. And so that was exciting. My mother, two brothers, and I stood in the kitchen while Betty told us all about what she remembered. And my father sat quietly in the living room with Barney. Barney was expecting to receive a call back from Pease Air Force Base. And he wasn't his usual gregarious self. He seemed quite distressed. And then Betty led us outside the house to the car where we saw those shiny spots that had caused that compass needle to rotate rapidly. So it was quite exciting for me that day, and I will never forget it. In my whole life, I have never forgotten that.
I suppose it shows, for me anyway, Kathleen, the bond between you and your aunt, because it very quickly seems to be that you become even closer throughout this period into the 60s and 70s. I know after Barney's very untimely passing in 1969, you lived with her for a period. She helped when you went to university, I believe, with some of your housing fees and things like that.
Yes.
It clearly cemented a real bond to you. Would you say it was the inspiration for would you say even as that young, excitable young girl at that point, how much of an inspiration this would be for the rest of your life? Was it clear to you quickly that this had suddenly changed any potential direction your life had until that afternoon in September 1961 when you heard all about what had happened to them?
It didn't change the course of my life immediately. I had intended to go to medical school after college, and I didn't go to medical school. I became a social worker and a teacher, and then an education services coordinator. But during those years, as various UFO investigators investigated the cases and the sightings and the original case, I met all of them. Or maybe all of them, I think all of them. And I was impressed by the scientific work they were doing. And it moved my focus more to the scientific investigation of UFOs. So when I left my career 35 years ago now to do my own investigation, I trained under the Mutual UFO Network and wanted to follow that scientific methodology and to review this case, investigate this case, do the research on this case in an unbiased manner, in a skeptical manner. And so I took it apart piece by piece by piece, re-interviewing Betty over and over again, going along the close encounter route, driving with my husband along the entire route that Betty and Barney took on their trip, in the same time frame, stopping in the same places, trying to punch holes into that story. I studied hypnosis in depth. I went to the university for a summer and did research on all the published articles I could find on hypnosis, academic findings. Then I became a hypnotherapist, not to use it, but to learn as much as I could about it, and then a quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. And finally, I did use it with some of the cases that I investigated that had physical evidence and more than one witness, preferably. So I just went deeper and deeper. I wrote about Betty and Barney as I went along, as I found more and more facts and evidence. I had my book, my manuscript written, but there was one part that I didn't want to tackle, and that was the star map.
Yes. Infamous star map.
Yes, I did not want to go back to college and learn to become an astronomer. I wanted to leave that work to the scientists. And I knew that Stanton Friedman, who was a nuclear physicist, had been intimately involved in the investigation of Betty's star map and the vetting of a brilliant woman from Ohio's work to identify the stars on that map. And I was aware of some of the other theories regarding the star map, too. But I wanted Stanton to sort of teach me what he could, and also to write a couple of books in the chapter. A couple of chapters in my book. So he did join me in doing that and giving an overview of everything he knew about Marjorie Fish's star map investigation. And she was so scientific. She went to the university, and in a time before computers, she could not even photocopy the books, the astronomical catalogs that she used. She had to sit and write all of the distance data and characteristics of the sun-like stars in our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years. And then she had to go back home and she had to build 3-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood, sort of out in wedge-shaped pieces from our sun. And she had to use silk thread and beads of various sizes and colors to represent the stars in that part of the local galactic neighborhood. And she had to do the math to know where to place each one of those stars. And you can imagine how frustrated she was after she completed that entire section of our local galactic neighborhood and still didn't have a match. Then, later, a new astronomical catalog was published, and she went back and she found new distance data. So she started rearranging the stars in 14 different models of these wedge-shaped models. And finally, because we made technological progress, she found a match. It was an incredible work. And those stars had special characteristics. I know skeptics will say, oh, it's like throwing marbles into a sand pit. And you can find that constellation anyway. You cannot find those stars in that formation anywhere having those characteristics. It's incredible. Only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood are sun-like, although all the stars on Betty's map were sun-like. And all the sun-like stars in that portion of space are on Betty's map. They make sense, nearest star to nearest star. They're all in a plane, which means that in terms of space travel, it would be easier to move from star to star. And one of the astronomers who vetted Marjorie's work said that if we were on Zeta Reticuli, or planets around Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which are the largest base stars, with 5 lines connecting them, meaning trade routes, that this is the precise route that we would take up to our sun. And our sun is on that map. So, I mean, it's really remarkable And you really can't dismiss it. It was updated in 2013 by an astrophysics student, graduate student, and still was 89% accurate today. And, and this was using computerized model of more than 2,000 maps.
Yeah.
Star maps. And it's just remarkable that those stars remain the most likely stars, but there are 2 stars that might be a better match than 2 of Marjorie's identifications.
I mean, even when you look at this, the whole theory at the point when the star map begins its sort of genesis, Kathleen, the theories about exoplanets and the potential for them, it was minimal at best. It was a very controversial subject at that point. We were still arguing about any potential life anywhere in the universe, never mind in our own doorstep, as it were. What we know now compared to what we knew 50 years ago, 40 years ago, is essentially like a thimble of water in the sea, really. We know so much more. And our development of our understanding of the universe around us and the probes we send out and what we've learnt about Mars in just the last 10 years simply shows that the perceptions are often put forward, but we always forget that we are limited by the boundaries of our own knowledge. The only thing that often pushes through that is the arrogance of some people who think that is the be-all and end-all of the universe, which I find remarkable. As someone whose stepfather was a doctor of chemistry, I've had a foot in both camps, Kathleen. So I'm sometimes able to kind of scoff at outlandish, crazy ideas, but also I get frustrated where certain well-known scientific celebrities will basically make a sort of end-all statement. And I just think that is the height of arrogance, because the one thing about science is it is a constantly evolving, moving ball of knowledge. It is never static. As even, like I say, talking about exoplanets and what we know about our nearest neighbours has completely changed. 100 years ago, we'd got people in France claiming that they could see canals on Mars, and there was people having parties and stuff. And people go, oh, really? That's really good. I mean, that very quickly got proved nonsense. But we now know that there are massive glacial scars all over Mars, which clearly shows that at some point it had large amounts of water. And so whilst the backstory is slightly different, we're still developing these theories and understanding of these places. And so you can never say never.
That's true, you can't. And initially, the scientists who looked at it said, well, those are Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, or a binary star system, and they could never have planets in a stable orbit. But now we know that they're far enough apart so that they could. So that's, just more knowledge changes everything. But still we have our deniers, the people who just can't imagine that this could be true, who will deny it all as arrogant scientists, regardless of the fact that the United States Congress is holding, has a committee, a committee on UAPs, and witnesses, high-ranking government officials, and high-ranking military officers who have had close contact with UFOs, and also one man who gave testimony who is aware of non-human tissue, DNA, that has been taken from these crafts as well. They talk about craft retrievals. All of this to Congress. But apparently those scientists who are making these proclamations aren't listening or somehow can't bring themselves to accept the idea that these high-ranking government officials are telling the truth.
I suppose as well, one of the aspects of this that I think some people might be a bit surprised about is not only do you get the usual sceptical arguments and the usual characters that have littered that side of the argument for decades, it would seem, but you also get attacked by what people would consider to be believers, ufologists. And it happens in certain fields with certain cases that it seems that people put a target on certain cases and the people in it, regardless of which side of the argument they're on. And I've seen very well-known ufologists, I think that's the politest term I can use, attack your aunt, your uncle, the story, your research, the people that have supported you, the other people that have come forward and helped you through this, and saying, absolutely ludicrous statements like all alien abductions are staged. And you're like, what? Hang on, who's flying around with this mobile film set then? Was that surprising to you as a family to see what you would consider your tribe turning against you in certain aspects, or wanting to sort of use this case to elevate their own ego and standing in the normal world, as it were?
I don't think I'm surprised by anything in the UFO field. There's a lot of conspiracy theory in that field, and there are people who are trying to make a living in that field, and they will put out new contradictory information twice a year or something like that. People who will make ludicrous statements, as far as I'm concerned, just to increase their popularity and maybe their income. So, yeah, I just have to disregard so many of these people, because if I tried to correct them, and I might try one time, but, you'd have to try over and over again, and I would never get anything accomplished. And I've worked pretty much part-time now, but it was full-time, more than full-time, in this field for years and years. And I would not have accomplished what I've accomplished and found the answers that I've found, along with my close colleagues in the studies that we have done, if I spent my time defending Betty and Barney and myself.
I suppose one of the strengths of this case as well is obviously that they had the foresight to keep their clothes at that particular time. I know Betty allegedly got rid of the dress and then thought better of it and brought it in. Mm-hmm. Obviously, what's happened in recent years is, as we're talking here about the advancements of scientific technology, forensics is completely unrecognisable to what it was 40 years ago. I mean, DNA tests cases were based on how much money can we spend to do a DNA test in the 1980s. That's where it simply started from. So it's not even reached 50 years, the DNA test, and yet we take it for granted this day and age.
Yes.
That dress has obviously undergone rigorous forensic testing in the recent area. And this is one of the things that's always fascinated about this, because obviously it threw up traces of really rare elements that, yes, they are on Earth, but they're extremely rare. And as far as I'm aware, they're not sort of hanging around on trees in New Hampshire for people to rub against.
That is correct. The chemists who did an extensive analysis, and these are tenured, 35-year academic chemistry department people training a student, and the really surprising elements found on that dress are tellurium and rhodium, and they are rare earth elements. Tellurium is extremely rare in the Earth's crust, but far more common in the universe. It's one of the rarest stable solid elements on Earth, and rhodium is one of the rarest and most valuable precious metals on Earth, with a higher melting point and lower density than platinum. And, I can think of no logical explanation for how those got on to Betty's dress. As I was doing my investigation online about tellurium and rhodium and what they're used for and their properties, I found that they are used a little bit on our planet, but the things that they're used in could not have been deposited on Betty's dress. For example, a compact CD, that silver, that shiny silver part, has some rhodium in the coating. But Betty didn't even have a computer. When I had Betty's things, her dress was hanging in her closet, and I was using floppy disks at that time. It was so long ago. And then I gave that dress to the University of New Hampshire for the archival collection that I donated. And the dress has been very carefully preserved, folded in a box, and only touched with white gloves. So as far as I know, there's no way those elements could have been deposited onto Betty's dress. And I further, in my investigation, found that both of them are used in nanotechnology. So then, it's really a jump to speculate, but it caused me just to wonder if when that dress dropped to the floor of the craft, if it picked up some kind of deposit, and especially with that rhodium being so light and having such a high density and high melting point, but so light, could that have comprised some of the floor of the craft or something in that craft? I don't know, it's a question that I have. We'll never have a definitive answer, but it's just interesting.
It certainly is. And I suppose as well, would Betty have really sort of appreciated how her sort of status would develop as well? Because as we touched on, Barney sadly passed away in 1969, but Betty passed away in 2004, I believe. Kathleen?
Yes.
She became something of I wouldn't say a regal figure in the experiencer movement or the contactee movement, but she certainly seemed to be, along with perhaps Travis Walton, one of those people that seemed to be a safe space for others to gravitate towards, to share their experiences with. And I would imagine for you as well, as you were saying, obviously part of your development and part of your work in this particular field has been assisting other contactees and experiencers in quite large numbers. I suppose, is it one of those things where you fully appreciate and understand and believe what happened in your family unit, what happened to your aunt and uncle, and what you've done and the evidence and the work you've got? Has that given you more kudos with other people, that they know they can talk to you about anything? Because for most people, you're the person. We don't have Bud Hopkins anymore. We don't have Dr. Mack. David Jacobs doesn't do much public work these days. Leonard Springfield is another one that is no longer with us. You are seen as one of the leading lights in the preservation and the support of these people.
Yes, absolutely. And I was so concerned about the violations of confidentiality that revealed people's identities and the criticism that was heaped on them unfairly, that I wanted to set up a team that would give anonymity and confidentiality to people, where they could feel confident that they could go to a person that was handpicked by me, who was trusted, who was trained, who would listen without judgment, and just assist a person. And that's why I set up MUFON's Experiencer Research Team. It's now the Experiencer Resource Team. And I'm now a consultant. I'm not actively working on that team because I'm growing older and want to spend more time with my aging husband. But I'm still somewhat involved with that team. That's one source. And I think it's extraordinarily important to give people that kind of outlet where they can seek help without publicity. And some of the people from my team went to an organization called OPUS, run by Lester Velez. And they do the same thing. They listen confidentially and non-judgmentally, and you get even a closer kind of relationship with one of the people on the Opus team.
I've always found it a strange aspect of it, because I've kind of gone full circle with it. It was something I was all on board with, and I don't know what happened to me about 15, 20 years ago, Kathleen, but I kind of went, I'm not really sure about this alien abduction experiencer thing. But since doing this show and getting to know people, I can now count on 3 friends who have all spoken to me candidly about their personal experiences and what happened to them. And I realised that I was the one that wasn't being open-minded. I was the one that was falling back onto cliches and ignorance. And it was my failure to grasp the gravity of the experience that was perhaps not allowing me to treat these people fairly. And it was only when somebody came up to me and said, can I talk to you about, because then obviously I'm into strange subjects and they know I've got an extensive library and I love ufology. In certain cases I'm fascinated by, including obviously this particular one. And my opinion changed overnight, because I thought that person's trusted me enough to tell me this story, this experience, shared it with me. And the very least I can do is treat them with the respect that deserves. And I changed it. Has it been difficult sometimes in the face of some of the experiences that have been shared with you, regardless of your personal history? Has that sometimes been a challenge, or is it a case of you just deal with it on a facts basis in regards to the processes and protocols that you instigated for MUFON in regards to assisting these individuals?
Well, I'm very empathetic. And so some of these things did bother me. But so what we did is we set up a network of approved hypnotists and psychotherapists, so that people could ask the MUFON's ERT or Opus for that information. They could receive a referral so that they could set up a private for-pay relationship with whatever person they wanted, and whatever was revealed to them did not have to be shared with the person at MUFON or Opus. They would share it only if they wanted to. And so, that's a way that I found to help individuals as well. We have a list of support groups, online support groups, where people can join and talk without judgment, without ridicule about what happened to them, and meet other people who have had the same kind of experience. And so you can share your stories. You can get to know one another. You can bond with one another. Those are the things that are important. Now, from an investigative side, you're just being biased because you're being skeptical. You're just looking for evidence. Some people do have a tremendous amount of evidence, but some people don't have any. But it's okay if you go to Opus or MUFON's ERT. And you can find those websites online. One is, I think, OPUS. It might be network.com, or it might be opus.com. You'll find it. And MUFON is MUFON.com. And I know that there's a chapter over in the UK.
Are you surprised, as you mentioned earlier, that we've got these congressional hearings going on in America? The experiencer is not anything about it. And I'm because I think for some people, regardless of whether they appreciate or enjoy or love this particular field of the Fortean, Kathleen, some people just don't want to go there at all. And I don't understand how you can have a congressional hearing about this phenomena, but you're only looking at this bit. And everything else, the other 95% of all the weird stuff that goes on and these stories that happen all around the world to people from all backgrounds, creeds, religions, cultures, whatever. There are stories you can find in every major country in the world of this kind of situation. Did it surprise you, or were you not surprised because of the pushback you will get immediately from certain circles? As soon as you start talking about the contactee experiencer movement, some people just go, no, I don't care.
Well, I'm not at all surprised that they're focusing on UFO sightings and not contact. The Congressional Oversight Committee has a relationship with the Pentagon, and the Pentagon does not want to endanger national security by presenting the idea before Congress and the American public, and then, the worldwide public, if you watch it on YouTube, that people are being abducted or having contact with non-human entities in a non-human, unearthly environment, presumably on UFOs. And so I can understand that totally. We have to get to points A, B, C, D, E, F, G, maybe beyond that, before we even begin to bring in the idea of non-humans. And when David Grush mentioned non-human tissue, it caused a huge uproar, a huge backlash by the Pentagon. His life was threatened. I mean, it was terrible. His own colleagues at the Pentagon released some kind of article that attempted to discredit him, to make him look bad. He had a really hard time as a result of that testimony.
It's unsurprising that the old tactics are still used on occasion when someone says too much, Kathleen. These are the kind of things we would see leaked to the press, as happened to your aunt and uncle, because this is the other aspect. They didn't come forward with this. They did everything behind closed doors, spoke privately to family and very close friends about it, spoke to a couple of individuals, as we said, from organisations to assist them, and that was it. And then somebody leaked the story to the press 4 or 5 years later. It still goes on. Here we are, 60 years later. Like I say, I remember the stories about Grush's mental states and saying, well, he's had mental health problems, as if that automatically derails anything he says. And you think, well, we're supposed to be in this modern era where we're all dealing about supporting mental health and how we all have challenges. And then as soon as somebody says something that officials don't like, the first thing they do go is, well, you can't really listen to him. He's had depression in the past.
Well, show me a military combat veteran who has had to kill innocent citizens, women and children, and show me someone who goes home happy-go-lucky, and that's the person with mental illness.
Absolutely.
It's not unusual for people to have some traumatic stress when they go home. We know that. There's an incredibly high suicide rate among combat veterans in the United States. An incredibly high rate of post-traumatic stress disorder as well. It doesn't mean they're psychotic. It means they're suffering from the mental images of what they saw, what they experienced, that go beyond what human emotions can deal effectively with and accept as part of their own behavior. And so it's really, really difficult. That's no reason to discredit a person's testimony.
Precisely. And it's something that's been front and centre in regards to veterans for the best part of half a century, because it was clearly some of the psychological damage that had been done to the troops in Vietnam, I think, Kathleen, and some of the horrendous situations these people found themselves in, lost, lonely, feeling completely isolated and often thinking that there was no reason to move forwards at all. And yet sometimes here we are 50 years later, like you say, it would be very unusual. And having spoken with and worked in a field rehabilitating offenders here in the UK several years ago, I was struck by the amount of ex-armed forces people that had fallen into criminality, drug addiction, alcohol abuse, petty crime, because they just weren't given the tools to move forward with their life once the armed forces had let them go.
Yes. The armed forces, in my opinion, need to take more responsibility toward these people. They have trained them to become killers, and then they don't untrain them. They just leave them with the results of what has happened. It's really very, very sad. Worldwide.
It is. It's shameful. As you say, they're very happy to take, these people are putting their lives on the line. But when that part of their life is over, they're often just left said, well, here you are, here's a handshake and maybe a bit of a pension. Good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it comes back to your Uncle Barney. Obviously, he was a World War II vet. This is another aspect of their illustrious life that I think often gets overlooked. He was this is what I've always found troubling about some of the dismissals of the case, is that, as we said at the beginning, they had everything to lose by making up such nonsense. There was nothing that would have benefited them in their life, as I say. And if they had have had congressional hearings in the 1960s that they weren't trying to sort of explain everything away with swamp gas and hallucinations and Venus and people maybe having the wrong kind of mushroom souffle on a holiday or something, Kathleen, what would they have said to your Uncle Barney at that time? Would they have kind of said, oh, well, it's...
But my Uncle Barney was not a combat veteran. During World War II, he was stationed in the United States at Newport News, Virginia, and he drove a mail truck. So he was driving mail up to Philadelphia in that time frame. And he ended up, I don't know, in some kind of training, and a grenade exploded, and it was an accident in which he was injured and was in the hospital. But so he didn't have to suffer from that post-traumatic stress disorder. But it was Dr. Benjamin Simon who worked with the veterans successfully. After World War II, we had the Mason General Hospital on Long Island in New York. And it was Dr. Simon who set up the psychiatric unit. He was a neuropsychiatrist. And he and the other psychiatrists under him worked with these veterans before they went home. Nowadays, it seems like we just send them home. We don't take them one by one and work with them before they're sent home. They really need some kind of program, some kind of facility to make sure they're okay before they're released into society. They need help.
They do. They need help and support and the opportunities to thrive once they're released from the shackles of serving their governments, like you say, from around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's one aspect I think that often gets overlooked in all of this, is obviously after this incident, there was a strange incident about 5 or 6 years later that also seems to have triggered off what some would suggest is paranormal activity in properties. I'm always intrigued about this. Once again, I think this is a part of the story that often gets overlooked. Once again, other than the initial sketches and diary and things that your aunt and uncle wrote down and that gets mushed into, 3 years later they must have seen the Twilight Zone. How was that as a secondary kind of thing that was going on? Because I would imagine this often pops up in certain cases, especially with contactees. There in certain ones there will suddenly seem to be some kind of ghost turn up, as if to say, well, you've seen the ones from over there, here's what we've got at home.
I've done a tremendous amount of research along with my teammates into this. We have done 4 studies on experiencers of ET contact, about 5,500 in all now. And that paranormal or paraphysical activity seems to be fairly common among experiencers. And I don't know if I've speculated that when these non-humans enter our environment, they're using some kind of a window or a portal. And I actually have a photograph that is verified and was taken by a professional, a man with a doctorate, a doctor's degree, medical doctor, and who is also an experiencer. And when you look at this, it shows you can see the ETs coming down through what appears to be some kind of a portal. Mm-hmm. You see first they're an orb, then you see the face, and then you see the body that pops out of the portal. And the portal is just like, it has 2 parallel lines on each side of these entities that come into our environment. Now, if they take us and they take us back into their environment and we become orbs, does this somehow impact us for the rest of our lives? That's what I wonder. I mean, it's highly speculative, but I keep thinking about this and the evidence that I've seen. Something happens so that there is a change, and so that these non-humans might be invisible or might be like shadows that come into, or sometimes even shimmering, come into our environment. The experiencers who have been in contact with them will feel this like electrical tingling sensation in their bodies. Some people say it's like static electricity in their bodies when these entities come into their presence. There's something electromagnetic in there too, I believe. But I think that, I just have the tip of the iceberg of what is occurring.
It's almost as if once you've seen the reality that isn't supposed to be there, it's almost as if after that the veil is always thin for these people.
It does seem that way. Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
I suppose as well, in the modern era, how do you see the support, as you say, Les's organisation as well as the branch of MUFON that looks after these people? Do you think that there's the next generation of people such as yourself, Kathleen, that are coming forward to support these people? But often we get told that ufology is just full of old men and nobody under the age of 50 seems to care anymore, which is clearly not true. Speaking from my experience here in the UK, there's a lot of up-and-coming young ufologists who are not necessarily fire and brimstone, but they've got that passion and that drive that you love to see in people in certain fields. Is that the case in the US? Is that still coming through? You've still got the people are still intrigued with these subjects and want to garner the skill sets that yourself and other members of these organisations have?
Well, younger people are still having contact with non-humans, and they still have an interest in what's going on. And we have to take into account the fact that most people have to work full time, and they don't have a lot of extra time to help people. So when they grow a little bit older and they slow down, or they're only working part-time, or they have some extra time and they're very committed to helping people, they are able to do that. So I feel optimistic that this is going to continue into the future.
In regards to the archive that's held at the university, is it a case of there are still things that, as science advances, Kathleen, there will be perhaps more things we can learn from the evidence that was collected at that period, as we've said about these very strange elements that are found on the dress? The star map as our understanding of the universes around us has developed, that has become a more solidified aspect of it, rather than it causing massive arguments between Carl Sagan and anybody that wanted to try and defend the star map in the 1970s, it seemed. Are you hopeful? Because often some people say, well, what else can we find out about this case? What else is there to discover? And yet, as you say, the forensic examination of the dress has clearly shown something that we wouldn't have been able to test until fairly recently, no?
That's true. And I'm gathering up all of this scientific information, the reports, and this summer I'm going to take them to the University of New Hampshire. And because I live in Florida now, but I'm going to speak at Exeter, New Hampshire in September. So I'm going to take that box of materials and donate them to the University of New Hampshire. They already have some of my materials that I donated with the first donation of Betty's things, but more, and as time goes on, as long as I live, I will be donating more information. And I know that as time goes on, we'll learn more. We don't even know if Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 have orbiting planets in a stable orbit. because we can only at this point see very large planets. And so we have to develop better technology so that we will be able to determine if stars out 39 light years and beyond have smaller planets, Earth-sized planets, in a stable orbit.
Well, you only have to look at the advances we've gone from what seemed like the cutting edge with the Hubble to what we can now see with the James Webb, which is one of those things I can just sit there and look at pictures of space and just think, what on earth am I looking at here? This is terrifyingly beautiful, because that's the thing about space. It is so vast and so unknown, and yet you can look at certain images from it, and it's mesmerising, it's hypnotic. And I'm one of those people, I look at that and I think, what couldn't be there? The possibilities are endless, surely.
They are endless. And something else that we have to do is we have to take that advanced technology and convince scientists to look beyond the taboo. You know, a lot of times they don't even want to, if they could, they wouldn't look at Zeta Reticuli because it's been cast as being so taboo since through history. And, so a lot of people just would turn their backs to it and shake their heads and say, put the hands over their ears and cover their eyes. They don't want to look. And we have to somehow find a way to change that. So maybe there will be brilliant astronomers in history who later on, who will not be so biased.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very excited about the work that Beatrice Velez, I think it is doing in regards to sort of archaeological astrophysics, really, looking at images that we took in the 50s and images now and going, hang on, where's that gone? Where's that gone? They're not there anymore, but the stars around them are there. That's something that seems to be a really new endeavour in the field of astrophysicists. And it seems increasingly tantalising that, once again, we seem to be seeing things that disappear, move, what? But there's something odd going on there.
Well, that's very interesting. I have not looked at that, and I will now that you've mentioned it.
Well, afterwards, I'll send you a link, because there's a couple of interesting papers which might intrigue you. Because I watched a documentary about it last year, and I was like, well, clearly we've got two official images here, and they don't match. So something's going on, and we can't blame it on dust on the lens, I think, Kathleen.
Right. Have the images been doctored?
Precisely. And if so, who by?
Well, we know that people who have worked for NASA claim that was their job, to remove certain images from NASA's photographs.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of images of Mars with bits covered off that's been redacted, and they won't say why. And you're like, what? It's a planet. What are we not hiding there? Is this that canal with all the people in, Kathleen? Is that what they're hiding from us, perhaps?
I know. Wouldn't you like to know? I would.
I would. But before I let you leave, what's the rest of 2026 got in store for you? No doubt you've got a very packed itinerary, because you're a very much in-demand speaker. You're obviously, as I say, you're a living legend in the experiencer movement, Kathleen. You've done so much work to support some of these people and their traumatic experiences. I would imagine, on top of normal life, 2026 is probably, even if you want to slow down, you've still got a lot to deal with. Well,
in 2026, I am developing new and exciting presentations with new AI technology. So I can't wait to show them at the conferences and colleges and maybe libraries where I'll be speaking. And also, I'm putting my archival collection together, assembling all of that. Rice University has accepted my personal collection for their permanent archives, and I'm excited about that. I have to read every single piece of paper in thousands and thousands of pages and redact any information that I don't want to go into it. So this is a very, very long process, and tiring too. So that keeps me busy as well.
Well, thank you for taking the time to fit me in. Like I say, it's you are someone I've wanted to speak to since I started doing this, and I'm delighted to have had that opportunity, and I hope I get an opportunity to speak to you again, Kathleen, in the future. Where can everybody follow your work, dive into your wonderful archive that you have on your website and your numerous publications that you have authored over the years?
Well, it was a delightful conversation. Thank you for having me. And you can go to my website at kathleen-marden.com, and you can see all of my books on that website, and you can purchase them from Amazon. They're in all formats on Amazon, so that's a good site to go to get them. Barnes & Noble, other long online sites have them as well, I guess, but maybe just the books. So that is really the best place to go to follow my work. I'm on Facebook occasionally. I don't like to take a lot of time for social media, but I do go on and post some information from time to time, especially when I'm going to be speaking somewhere.
Lovely. Well, once again, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to spend some time in your company, and I wish you the best for the rest of this year. And as I say, I hope I get a chance to pick your brains about all things in the UFO field again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.